My parents forbade my wedding simply because I dared to marry before my so-called perfect older sister. That's not an exaggeration or some made-up story meant to grab attention. It's the truth. Raw, cold, and painful. They didn't show up. Not a blink of an eye, not a word of apology, not a flower, not even a congratulatory message. They vanished from my big day as if it had never existed. Just because I did something they never imagined I would have the courage to go get married before their golden child. I still remember that afternoon vividly, standing in the white dress I had chosen alone. There was no mother by my side to hold my hand through every bridal store, no proud father's eyes watching his daughter step into a new chapter of life. I walked down the aisle between rows of fresh flowers, hand in hand with the man who loves me with all his heart. But in the front row where my parents were supposed to sit there were only two cold, empty chairs that took my breath away. In what should have been the happiest moment of my life, I felt something inside me quietly break a fragile dream that, maybe someday, my parents would understand, that maybe one day they'd love me the way they always loved her. I tried not to cry. I kept telling myself, "You're the bride. You have a husband, friends, a new family now." But the moment the MC invited my father to come up and give a speech and he had to awkwardly cover it up with an unclear excuse, I felt my heart shatter all over again. Before I tell you how I faced the truth about my family's favoritism and finally found freedom, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt like the forgotten child? If so, leave a comment, hit subscribe, and stay with me because sometimes the moment they abandon you is exactly when you begin to stand on your own. My family used to be seen as the picture of success and perfection by neighbors, friends, and colleagues. My father was a philosophy teacher, always preaching morality and expectations. My mother was the chief accountant at a major company, always polished, polite, and skilled at maintaining appearances. Every Thanksgiving or Christmas, we showed up with perfect smiles in the photos sent around to the extended family. Everyone would say, "Now that's a model family." But what no one ever noticed was that I always had to stand slightly off to the right in every picture to leave the spotlight for my sister, Maya. Maya was everything my parents ever dreamed of. Beautiful, tall, fair-skinned, with long, silky hair like a Pantene ad. Since kindergarten, she had been called an angel. In middle school, she won a full scholarship to a prestigious arts academy. In high school, she was head cheerleader, student body president, even made it into the top 3 finalists for the national science team. Every accomplishment she achieved was met with a celebration hosted by our parents, from her Ivy League acceptance to the time she simply landed on the cover of the school newspaper. That photo, her in a white blazer, diploma in handies, still framed in the center of our living room, right above the fireplace. Anyone who enters the house sees it first. And my photos? There aren't any. Even though I graduated, I work, I try, but somehow my milestones never seemed big enough to be worthy of a frame. Whenever we had guests, my mother would beam as she bragged about Maya. "She's a creative director now, can you believe it? Only 28. But when I came down the stairs, she'd simply nod and say, "Rebecca, come say hello." Never once was it, "Rebecca just got promoted." Never once, "She's doing great." I felt like a shadow of my sister, always standing behind her, always hidden by a spotlight I was never allowed to touch. I grew up in a family where I was never allowed to be myself, only expected to become a replica of someone else. Follow your sister's example. When she was your age, she already knew how to cook. Your sister just got a perfect score on her test. You better catch up. Look at your sister and try harder, Rebecca. Those words became the background music of my childhood, playing on a loop. And slowly, I stopped asking why I wasn't enough. I just stayed silent, tried harder, and hoped that someday they would see that I too deserved to be loved. But that day never came. Because in their eyes, I was only the shadow behind. And a shadow is never allowed to walk ahead of the light. I still remember the day my mother told me to stop eating my second slice of birthday cake. I was only 8. "You don't want to end up fat like Aunt Carla, do you?" she whispered, quiet enough to sound like a joke, but loud enough to make my cheeks burn with shame in front of the whole family. Meanwhile, my sister Maya sat beside me with a slice of red velvet as big as her palm, and my mother gently said, "Go ahead, eat it. You're so thin, it'll make you prettier." I looked at the cake in my hand like it was evidence of failure, not just a failure to control my appetite, but a failure to become the kind of daughter my mother could be proud of. After that day, she signed me up for morning fitness classes, then afternoon yoga for kids. My sister? She was taken to the spa, had her yearbook portraits professionally done, and took ballroom dance lessons to cultivate grace. Those little differences didn't just show up at mealtimes. They bled into every moment of my growing up. I remember the time I won third place in our school's writing contest, a piece I spent an entire week rewriting 5 times. I handed the certificate to my parents with shaking hands, and they barely glanced at it before saying, "That's fine. Try harder next time." That same night, my mother posted a photo of Maya standing next to a celebrity at some conference in New York. The caption was nearly a full page long. "So proud of my talented, brave, and beautiful daughter." Not a single relative ever knew about my writing. No one asked me what I had written. The peak of it all was my 16th birthday, that age every American girl dreams of as a milestone. When Maya turned 16, my mother threw a backyard party with over 50 guests, twinkling string lights, a 3-tier cake, and even a private DJ. I still remember the pale pink dress my mom had custom-made for her, and the moment she was handed the keys to her first Cara cream-colored Mini Cooper with a giant red bow. When it was my turn, my birthday was a quiet dinner at home. No cake, no balloons, no special gifts. My mother simply looked at me across the table and said, "Remember not to make a scene like last year. You're 16 now, you should know how to behave with maturity." I swallowed every moment of being overlooked, pushed aside, and forgotten. Every seemingly harmless comment piled up like thin paper cutscenes that didn't bleed but carved into my heart day after day. I started to believe I really wasn't good enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, and most painfully, not enough to be truly loved like a daughter who mattered. And maybe that's why, when I met someone who looked at me without the lens of comparison, my heart trembled as if it had finally touched sunlight for the very first time. I met him on a chilly autumn afternoon at a small tech seminar in Boston, a place filled mostly with gray suits, open laptops ready with presentation slides, and hurried handshakes. I had gone there just to hear a talk about a new programming topic, expecting nothing more than a few notes for work. But when I accidentally dropped my notebook while looking for a seat, it was him with quiet brown eyes and a subtle smile who bent down to pick it up. No offhand joke about rare female programmers, no suspicious glance, no forced curiosity. Just a silent look, as if he already knew me somehow. We spoke during the break. A few words about tech, and then, unexpectedly, blueberry pie. I didn't understand why I laughed so much, one of those unguarded, unfiltered laughs, where I didn't have to revise what I said or worry if I sounded unfeminine in anyone's eyes. He didn't ask what school I went to, didn't bring up awards or LinkedIn profiles. Instead, he asked how it felt working in a field people often said wasn't made for women. And when I started to tell him, really tell him, he didn't interrupt, didn't jump in with a more interesting story of his own, didn't try to correct me. He simply listened, nodded gently, and looked me straight in the eyes as if every word I said mattered. We stayed in touch after that. Long conversations that stretched into the night, messages that were never left unread, little memes he'd send just to make me laugh after a long day. For the first time, I felt I didn't have to shrink myself just to be accepted. I didn't have to squeeze into the invisible dress labeled good daughter, perfect little sister, my sister's duplicate. I could like bitter coffee, write messy code, forget to wash my hair sometimes, and still be loved. No one had ever looked at me the way he did, as if I was me, and not some faded version of someone else. And I realized, maybe in this whole life, I only ever needed one person like that. Not a hero, not a star, Not a champion of anything, just someone who made me feel, for the first time, that I didn't need permission to exist. I announced our engagement on a quiet evening after Thanksgiving dinner with the family. I had waited for that moment for weeks, playing out all the possible reactions in my head: an unexpected hug from my mother, a slow, approving pat on the shoulder from my father, or at the very least a soft smile and a simple, "I'm happy for you." But all I got was silence. My mother gently set her spoon down, as if I had just spilled an important dish. My father looked at me over his reading glasses, not angry, not pleased, just blank, as though I had announced switching jobs, not a life-changing moment. A few seconds later, my mother asked, her voice flat and emotionless, "Are you sure? I mean, shouldn't you lose a little more weight first? Just to look better in the dress?" It felt like someone had slapped me across the face with a question that seemed harmless but hit so deep it knocked the air out of my lungs. Before I could respond, my father added, "Well, Maya's going to feel pretty uncomfortable about this." I frowned, not quite understanding. Then my mother explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, the plan was for Maya to get married first. Everyone knows that. She's been planning the wedding since last year. I even saved all her Pinterest boards. Now you suddenly announcing this, it's really... There was no congratulations. No one asked what he was like. No one said, "Let's sit down and plan this together." Only concern about the broken order, the family's image, about who was supposed to marry first. As if a wedding wasn't about love, but a race I had foolishly won before the one they believed was meant to cross the finish line. I let out a quiet laugh, trying not to let my eyes spill over. Deep inside, I knew something had cracked. A fragile thread that tied me to their acceptance had started to come undone. But I still held on to hope, still clung to the naive belief that maybe they were just caught off guard. That, in a few weeks, things would be different. I had no idea that this reaction was only the first step in a long, cold storm that was coming. My engagement ceremony took place on a soft Sunday afternoon, in the backyard of my fiancé's family home, a place filled with green grass, string lights strung across the trees, and rustic wooden tables draped in simple white cloth. I wore a cream-colored dress chosen with the help of my future mother-in-law, holding a glass of wine, doing my best to smile at every guest who came to celebrate. My friends were there, my colleagues, his relatives. Everyone was warm and joyful, the air humming with happiness. But among all the blessings, glowing faces, and gentle music, two people were missing, though I had tried hard not to expect much. My parents. They came, on time, but brought no gifts, gave no speech, and didn't take a photo with me. They quietly chose a table in the back and spoke only with each other and a few familiar faces. When the host invited someone from the bride's family to say a few words, they both shook their heads gently, my mother even turning away as if she hadn't heard. I felt my cheeks burn, a wave of shame crashing over me. My husband squeezed my hand under the tableau, small gesture, but just enough to keep me from breaking down right then and there. Halfway through the event, I stepped into the garden to catch my breath and overheard my mother on the phone, her voice low, but clear enough. "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't cry. Your wedding is the real one. This is just a placeholder. Just emotions. It won't last." I stood behind the hedge, my heart twisting tight. They were comforting my sister not because she was heartbroken or facing some crisis, but because of me. Because I had dared to love first, dared to marry first. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter preparing to begin a new chapter. I was a disruption, a thorn that had thrown off the perfect script they had written for her. Back at the engagement party, I looked around. Everyone was laughing, chatting, taking pictures, raising glasses. And yet I, standing in the middle of my own celebration, felt like a stranger to a story I was never truly part of. It wasn't just a party forgotten by my parents, it was the quiet death of a dream. A dream of being seen, being loved the way I had longed for my entire life. A dream they had abandoned long ago without ever looking back. 1 week before the wedding, I was sitting at the dinner table with my fiancé, going over the final checklist seating chart, name tags, flower arrangements when my phone rang. It was my mother. I paused, surprised. She hadn't called in months. A small hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe she wanted to give input on the dress? Maybe she'd finally decided to come? But when I answered, her first words weren't warm or curious. Her voice was sharp and cold. "Your father and I will not be attending the wedding, and don't be surprised if no one from our side of the family comes either." I froze. "Why?" I whispered. There was a long pause. Then she spoke, slowly, deliberately, as if carving each word into stone. "Because this is a blatant act of disrespect to your sister. You knew perfectly well she hadn't married yet. And still, you went ahead. You didn't just put yourself ahead of her, you've disgraced this family." That. I couldn't speak. On the other end, I heard my father's voice, calm but firm. "This isn't something a respectable family should support. We can't attend a ceremony built on selfishness and broken order." Order? I was expected to preserve some invisible hierarchy just so someone else wouldn't feel threatened? My wedding, this love, this new beginning, this happiness I had carefully built day by day was being treated as a slap in their face simply because it happened before they wanted it to. I had no more words. All I could manage was, "Thank you for letting me know." Then I ended the call. That night, I sat alone on the balcony, the soft glow from inside the house casting a faint light through the glass. My husband placed a cup of tea beside me and said nothing, just sat quietly next to me. I felt like I had been stripped of my citizenship, banished from a country called family, a place I had always believed I belonged to. Not because I had betrayed them, not because I had done something wrong, but simply because I loved and I dared to love before my sister. It didn't feel like sadness, it felt like emptiness. A hollow tear in the center of my chest, where fragile illusions used to live, illusions that, maybe, someday, they would change. I was no longer their daughter. Not in their eyes, not in their hearts. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I had ever truly been. My wedding day arrived under the soft chill of early autumn, as the leaves began to turn shades of amber and gold, falling gently onto the stone path that led into the garden where the ceremony would take place. Everything had been thoughtfully prepared, white linens draped over each table and chair, rose petals scattered along the aisle, the sound of violins drifting softly through the open air. My friends were there in full, my husband's colleagues flew in from around the country, his extended family all present and glowing with joy. Everyone smiled. Everyone shined. But I, wearing the simple A-line wedding gown I had chosen after 3 solo appointments, felt a silent emptiness circling me, as if something essential had been left out, misplaced, erased from the perfect picture. My father wasn't there waiting at the end of the aisle to take my hand and place it into my groom's crucis. My mother didn't stand beside me to fix my veil, didn't shed tears of joy like I once imagined she would when I was a child. Instead, I walked alone, heart pounding in my chest, eyes fixed ahead where my husband stood, in a charcoal gray suit, his gaze warm like a rising sun. He didn't blink, his smile wasn't perfect, but it was sincere enough to temporarily fill the hollow space I carried within me. When the MC invited the bride's family to give a speech, the entire garden fell into a single beat of silence. Then my mother-in-law, Clara, stood up. She walked to the center, holding the microphone, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I didn't give birth to her," she said, "but I know I've just been gifted a daughter I will love as if she were my own blood. My daughter is brave, strong, and worthy of all the love in this world." Applause followed. I turned to look at Herond. She smiled, arms open wide, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. I used to believe no one could ever replace my parents. But in that moment, I came to understand something deeper. Sometimes, real family isn't where you're born, it's where you're truly seen and loved for who you are. When the ceremony ended, I sat alone for a few quiet minutes before heading to the evening reception. The late afternoon light spilled gently across the wooden chairs. And in the front row, the seat marked, "Father of the Bride," that chair still sat empty. I looked at it for a long time, not with bitterness or anger, but because I needed to remember. To remember that on the day I started a new chapter of my life, the one who should have stood by me chose not to. And I chose the opposite, to stand tall, to move forward, and to open my heart to another family, one where I didn't need to compete for space or pretend to be perfect in order to be loved. After the wedding, I prepared myself for the long silence I knew would follow from my parents. What I didn't expect was that they would be the first to break it. Just a few days after our honeymoon, I began receiving strange messages from relatives. "Is it true you didn't send your parents an invitation? I heard you hid their address so they couldn't attend." I was stunned. What was going on? It turned out my mother had been calling every relative in the family, her voice choked with staged sobs, telling them I had deliberately cut them out of the wedding and was now playing the victim. She said she never received an invitation, that I had sent it to the wrong address, used an outdated email, then turned around and blamed them to gain sympathy. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard it from Aunt Hai, who had received both the email and the printed invitation from the exact same system. I still had screenshots of the delivery receipt, even an email open confirmation from their account. I had all the proof. And, strangely, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the need to explain. I no longer wished to be believed. I stayed silent. I didn't respond to any accusations. I didn't defend myself. I didn't send screenshots or receipts to anyone. I had crossed the boundary of wanting to be understood. I no longer needed to prove my innocence, because the innocent don't need to scream in a room full of people who've chosen to pretend they're deaf. And it was that silence that began to make people pay attention. Relatives started to ask questions. A few recalled seeing my wedding photos where everyone was present, except my parents. One uncle called my mother directly and asked, "Why would she invite me and not you?" She deflected, lied, twisted the story. But the truth has one defining trait. The more you try to hide it, the clearer it becomes. Each story, each fragment leaked from my mother's twisted retelling, and the real picture began to emerge. No longer the image of a rebellious daughter who had shamed the family, but that of someone who had endured in silence for years and finally, simply married the person she loved. I didn't need to win. I just needed the truth to stay still long enough for people to finally see it on their own. I hadn't planned on calling. Truly, I thought I would let it all pass like the dozens of times before, excellence, endurance, and burying it deep like a bruise no one ever noticed. But something inside me broke open this time. Maybe it was when Aunt Ba messaged. "Your mom's story sounds strange. Are you sure you didn't say anything hurtful first?" Maybe it was when I looked at my wedding photo where the first seat remained empty, and I smiled, but smiled alone. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. My hand didn't shake, my heart didn't race. There was only a quiet certainty. It was time. The phone rang 3 times. She picked up. No greeting, no hello. Just a sigh. "What do you want to say now?" I took a breath. "I just want to speak the truth." Yes, I was jealous. But not because my sister is prettier, smarter, or gets to marry first. I was jealous because for my entire life, my parents never loved me the way they loved her. Silence. I thought she might choke up, or at least acknowledge something. But no. She laughed. A dry, bitter laugh. And what's the point of saying that? To paint yourself as the victim, trying to get sympathy? Don't forget we raised you, and now you're biting the hand that fed you? Then came my father's voice. He took the phone from her, his tone firm and stern. "If you felt neglected, why didn't you ever say anything? Why wait until now, after everything's over, just to start blaming us?" I smiled, a calm, unsettling kind of smile. I did. Every time I tried, Mom told me I was being too sensitive. "You said I was selfish." Every time I opened my mouth, I was silenced with a story about her success. I didn't stop. I said it all. About the time my graduation dinner was canceled because she had a photo shoot, about the birthday that everyone forgot, about the way my mother's eyes judged me every time I gained a little weight, about what it felt like to grow up in a family where I was always the leftover piece. And finally, I said, I don't need you to admit it anymore, but I need to say it. This is the first time I'm not swallowing it down. She was quiet for a long time. Then she ended with a sentence that felt colder than anything before. You just can't stand not being the center of attention, always needing everything to revolve around you. That's your problem. I stared into the space in front of me, where the sunlight streamed in through the curtain, silent as if it too were listening. I wanted to respond. But instead, I lowered the phone from my ear and pressed it against my heart. 1 beat. 2 beats. Still beating, still alive. I lifted the phone again and said softly, "Number." This time I'm not apologizing. Not because I'm right, but because I no longer need forgiveness for being myself. I ended the call. No yelling, no tears, no breakdown. Just a stillness in my soul, like I had finally pushed open the first door of the cage I had been living in for far too long. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to feel free. I thought that after the explosive confrontation with my parents, everything would finally quiet down. But I underestimated one person, my sister, Nantha, one the entire family still referred to as the golden daughter. She didn't call me, didn't text, didn't speak a word to me. Instead, she chose another path more calculated, more venomous. She messaged my husband directly. I only found out when I was at work and got a message from him. "Are you free? There's something you need to see." When I got home, he was sitting in the living room, his phone resting on the table like a foreign object he didn't want to touch again. "Maya messaged me," he said, voice steady but eyes shadowed with disappointment. "It's long, really long." I opened the message. The first one began with a fake sweet greeting. "Hi, this is Maya, Rebecca's sister. I'm reaching out not because of personal issues, but out of concern for the family's stability. I believe that as her husband, you should help guide her to behave more reasonably before things spiral out of control." The next message was a lengthy stream of sugar-coated poison. She claimed I was suffering emotional distress leading to erratic behavior, and that the wedding was just an excuse I'd used to create drama and divide the family. And then, the offer. "You're a smart man. I'm sure you realize that having a strong relationship with someone like me, someone with status, influence, and powerful connections could be extremely beneficial for your career. If you're clever, we could both benefit from this." I froze. Not because she had spoken ill of me, I was used to that. But because she dared to treat my husband like a pawn, a man she assumed would be easily swayed by status, power, and glossy appearances. As if everything she had ever learned in life boiled down to one thing: how to make others feel small enough to need her. I looked at my husband. He was still sitting there, steady and calm. He'd picked up his phone and showed me the message he had sent back to her. Just one sentence. "Thank you for your concern for Rebecca. But the only thing I care about is my wife's happiness, and she doesn't need to change for anyone." I read that message over and over again that night. Every word felt like a tiny flame lighting up in my chest. In a family where love was always conditional, where kindness was measured in comparison, this quiet, unwavering response was salvation. I sat beside him, leaned on his shoulder without a word. He held my hand, silent. Amid all the chaos, the manipulation, the endless voices telling me to be more reasonable, I found one person who understood something they never did: that I didn't need to be reasonable to be worthy of love. I only needed to be myself. That was enough. I didn't tell anyone else about what happened. I didn't send messages, didn't justify, didn't ask for anyone to take sides. I simply stayed silent and kept living. But that very silence, somewhere along the way, became a mirror. And in that reflection, the people around me began to see everything more clearly. It started with Aunt Tooth, one who had always been closest to my mother in the family, calling me out of the blue, her voice hesitant. I don't want to interfere, but are you okay? I've heard both sides, but honestly, I believe you." That sentence made my eyes sting. Not because of the words themselves, but because it was the first time in my life someone in the family had dared to openly not side with the perfect family image my parents had spent years building. Then Uncle Nantha, quiet one, the one who always avoided conflict, canceled his attendance at Maya's wedding. At a small family gathering, he set down his coffee cup and said, calmly but firmly, "I don't want to keep watching someone be treated like an outsider. I've stayed silent long enough." And just like that, like a domino effect, one by one, people began to step away from the artificial circle. A cousin in Texas refused to be a bridesmaid. An uncle who had helped Maya book her wedding venue returned the invitation, saying, "My family has some things to work out." A cousin who was supposed to do hair suddenly had a full schedule. The youngest uncle claimed he couldn't catch a flight. But I knew, and so did they, that this wasn't about scheduling conflicts or technical reasons. It was protest. Quiet, but weighty. None of them shouted. None of them made a scene. They just stopped. They didn't show up. They no longer pretended to support what wasn't right. And in that silence, the first visible cracks appeared in the perfect family my parents had so carefully curated. The polished outer shell could no longer hide the manipulation, the favoritism, the deep-seated injustice underneath. I didn't feel joy that they took my side. I wasn't after victory. But I felt relief. Because finally, the truth was no longer buried beneath pretty justifications. And I knew I wasn't alone anymore in the journey to reclaim the truth of my own life. When my parents noticed relatives quietly pulling away, they didn't stay silent for long. Quite the opposite, they panicked. They began calling, texting, emailing everyone in the extended family, from distant cousins to uncles they rarely spoke to, all repeating the same script: that I was making things up, stirring people up, seeking revenge for not getting attention. Oh? My mother even posted a long, sorrowful note on Facebook. "We've tried our best with both daughters. I don't understand why Rebecca would choose to divide the family right when Maya's wedding is near. As parents, it breaks our hearts to be treated like this." But this time, people weren't so easily led. Questions began to surface in the comments, in private messages they never thought would come to light. One relative replied, "What about the time you made Rebecca give up her study abroad spot so Maya could go instead?" Another asked, "I remember when Rebecca won the state scholarship, you said nothing while Maya got a big party just for being honored at her school. Where's the fairness in that?" Slowly, old memories, things everyone used to brush off as small stuff, began to be re-examined under a new light. And people started to realize my family had never truly been fair. They had only mastered the illusion of fairness. The family photos with beaming smiles at Christmas, the sweet birthday messages always directed at my sister, the holidays when I got a self-help book while she unwrapped the latest phone suddenly, all of it became living proof of a long history of favoritism, one that had been dressed up and sold as equal love. An older uncle, once very close to my mother, finally spoke out during a small family gathering. He looked straight at her and said, "You don't get to manipulate everyone like you used to. We're not blind." His words were sharp as a blade, but they were also a wake-up call for everyone who had stayed silent out of fear of causing a stir or losing favor. The perfect family my parents had worked so hard to construct, with Maya at the center and me forever on the outskirts, was no longer a monument. It had become a distorted legend, a shattered mirror reflecting injustices everyone had quietly ignored. And now, their final mask had fallen. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. No one believed it anymore. And strangely, in that moment, I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief, as if the weight I had carried since childhood had finally dropped to the ground. I had wanted to stay silent forever, to let them face the consequences they had created on their own. But I realized something. If I didn't say one final word, everything I had spoken up until now would always be dismissed as a passing storm of anger. And more than anything, I wanted to be the one to place the final period. I sat at a table with a blank sheet of paper and an ink pen. Not in rage, not with bitterness, just with a heart that had filled itself enough to no longer beg for anything. I wrote to my father, to my mother, and to Maya a letter not meant for them to understand me, but for me to set myself free. To my parents and sister. I write these words not to argue, not to seek your agreement. I just want you to know. I no longer need you to feel worthy of love. I no longer want to compete with my sister for scraps of attention. I no longer search for a seat at a dinner table that has turned its back on me too many times. For years, I tried to be just loud enough to be noticed, small enough not to be hated, and obedient enough not to ruin the image of the family you were so desperate to preserve. But the cost was me. Today, I take myself back. I hold no grudge. I seek no forgiveness. I ask only for freedom from warped expectations, from a race between two daughters where only one was ever truly loved. I'm married. I'm living. And I am happy. The only thing I take from this family is a lesson. That sometimes, loving yourself is the bravest thing a forgotten child can do. I signed my name. I didn't send it by email. I didn't post it online. I printed 3 copies, placed them in 3 envelopes, and mailed them to 3 addresses. No reply necessary. That letter wasn't for them. It was for me. A ritual of closure. That night, I stood alone on the balcony of our new apartment, watching the city slowly dim beneath the fading light of sunset. In my hand was a wedding photo, a beautiful shot, me in my white dress, my husband smiling beside me, surrounded by people who truly loved us. But there were 2 faces missing from the frame. I looked at that empty space and felt no pain anymore. Just a scarlet bleeding, but still there to remind me. And I smiled. Not a forced smile, but a real one from the deepest place in my heart.